So I wanted to share my story about how I escaped the 9 to 5 and moved from the corporate world into self-employment. So I traded a nice, secure, well-paid job for complete uncertainty. I traded a nice office in London for my kitchen table. So what were my motivations? What was the reason for me changing and moving from a corporate world? Well, the first one was work-life balance. At that point, I had a young family, I had a mortgage, I had all the bills, everything was on me. But the problem was I didn't see the children. I'd go to work early in the morning and I'd get back late at night. I just didn't see the kids. And the second one for me was, was I happy in the corporate world? Well, I had just been doing it since I sort of left university and I was just doing that corporate job. But there were definite signs. There were things like that Sunday night feeling when you get the knots in your tummy. And there's things when you wake up at night and you're thinking about work. So when you sort of step out of it and reflect back on it, actually, was I happy? Well, probably not. And the third reason was I wanted to be in charge of my own destiny. So, my dad, he got made redundant in his 50s. I'd worked in organisations that were often going through periods of downsizing. And there was sort of an element in the back of my mind thinking, actually, I do need to build some security here, some longer term security. So that was the other reason for wanting to transition into and work for myself rather than working for a corporate company. So what did I do and how did I do it? Well, the first thing I did is I procrastinated. I procrastinated for about 3 or 4 years, thinking about a decision, thinking about the choices that I was about to make. It is a big decision, and it's not one to be taken lightly. For me personally, it was one of the biggest decisions I've ever made in my life. But once I made that decision, I then had to think about, well, what am I going to do? Okay, and I think if I was going to do it again, if I had time, I would have set myself up in business almost as a side hustle, so doing it in the evenings, doing it at weekends. I didn't do that. I resigned from my corporate job and then I set up my own company. But if I'd done it again, then I might have been inclined, if I could, and certainly some people do this, is to try and set it up as a side hustle to start with, and then build on that, build it up, build that side hustle up into a full-time job. But I didn't do that. I just went, right, I'm going to resign. But the good thing was that then gave me the time to think about the ideas that I wanted to do for myself, my own business. So at that point, I didn't really know what I was going to do. So I resigned from my corporate job. I didn't know what I was going to do. I looked at various options. One of those options was I looked at the property side of things, sort of the homes under the hammer style things, but actually I realised I didn't really have any experience in that. I did look quite seriously at franchising because I needed a low risk business opportunity, and franchise obviously got a proven business model, so I did look at franchising. And the third option I looked at was basically setting up my own finance and accounting firm. I did spend quite a lot of time sitting in Cafe Nero in a coffee shop, just going through sort of pros and cons of all of those options. And I sort of eventually ended up with the finance and accounting firm. So that's what I did. So then once I decided that was what I was going to do, I was then sort of in execution stage. So what do I do? And I think sort of reflecting back on it now, the things that I didn't do and wish I had done was things like mentoring. There's a lot of people out there that are generous with their advice, that'd be happy to mentor you. And I didn't really look for that or seek advice. And I do regret that now. And I have got mentors now that have been great for me in the sort of stages of the business now. But at the outset, I was pretty much on my own. It's quite a lonely place to be. But there's definitely people out there that will help you, will support you. That might be friends, family, network, business contacts. But definitely, that mentoring is important. The second thing, which I did a lot of, was networking. Just getting out there, meeting people, meeting potential suppliers, meeting potential customers, but just building that sort of business network locally. And that was really important for me. The third area is making sure that I've got financing in place. And what I would say is make sure that you've got adequate funding for yourself, because when you step out of that corporate world, well, for me, those bills didn't go away. I still had a mortgage to pay, I still had the bills to pay, and obviously you haven't got that regular income coming in. So that sort of making sure that you are well funded is really important. And I would really, really recommend that you build sort of a simple cash flow forecast. Just money in, money out of your day-to-day outgoings and what your income is likely to be. And one of the tips I would say is, because we see this as well in that sort of the corporate world when we're dealing with clients, is when people set up a business, they often set up funds for the first 12 months. And what we often see is the crunch point is at 18 months, because people have funded themselves for the first 12, they will assume that the business will fund them for the second year. In reality, that quite often gets pushed out. So a month 18, I always say to people, is like your critical month. And it was true for me as well. That's the month when potentially the funds are starting to dwindle from your initial funding that you set aside. But the business hasn't necessarily got to a point where it can sustain you yet. So make sure you've got funding in place. Sources of funding, savings are a great one. I took out, so I saved, I took out a small loan as well. So, but make sure you've got sufficient funding in place, because it's going to be very stressful for you if you haven't got that funding in place. So once you've sort of, you've got that structure in place and you start, potentially building a business, then really you're into sort of growth mode there. And the thing that I think is really important for me was recognising what my blind sides were. So I was an accountant, so I knew the finance of the business, but I didn't know anything about sales, didn't know about marketing, HR, and all of those things. All of a sudden, you've got to be kind of an expert on, or you've certainly got to know your way around. But because being a good technician and being good at what you do isn't going to be good enough for you to actually run and execute a successful business. So then you've got to look at your network. So what do I do for sales and marketing experience? What can I do? So a lot of what I did was just self-taught. So you start to research. How in my case, I was building a finance outsourcing company, so your finance team. But I didn't know how do you market that. But of course, there's loads of resources online. Some of it's quite contradictory. Some of us say do this, some say do that. But actually, there is some really good resources out there. But it's really important that you have that marketing plan and that sales plan in place for your business. So really recognise what your blind sides are, and where you have got those blind sides, what can you do about it to mitigate and manage those blind sides. And then as you move into sort of business growth, hopefully your business will grow, you'll start to scale. And then you're going to feel sort of the natural pressures that any growth business does. So you're going to get pressures on cash flow, you're going to get pressures on staffing, resourcing, sales. You're going to get all of that in the mix. And therefore you as a business owner have really got to be staying one step ahead of that and really looking about how you can grow your business in a sustainable, managed way. For me personally, I've been 10 years now out of the corporate world, growing your finance team. We're now a good size. We've got some great staff, great team, great customers, but it just takes time. And through that journey there is a considerable amount of ups and downs. Someone said to me, the highs are the highs and the lows are the lows, and it's absolutely true. It is a journey that you'll go on. But as long as you're true to yourself, you understand what your core offering is. In our case, we want to deliver great client service, and that has been key to our offering right the way through the years, and that stood us in really good stead. So if that's been useful for you, please like and subscribe. We generate these videos regularly, and I just wanted to share some of those sort of personal experiences, because hopefully they'll be useful for you when you're growing your business and hopefully escaping the 9 to 5.